All right, let's talk about something big that's happening right now. The world order, as we've known it, well, it's shifting. We're moving away from an era dominated by one single superpower and back into something that looks a lot more like, well, great power competition. The big question is, how did we get here? And what does it all mean? Let's dig in.
So, to really understand this shift, let's go back in time a bit. I want to tell you a story from a BBC journalist, Alan Little. Picture this. It's New York, not long after 9/11. The city is still hurting, really vulnerable. And he gets up to speak, and he starts by saying his entire life was shaped by one thing: America. So he paints this picture of the Western Europe he knew as a kid, a place that was peaceful, felt safe, and was getting more and more prosperous. And he made the point that this peace didn't just happen by accident. It was, in his view, won by American military might and then rebuilt with American money through the Marshall Plan. And the climax of all of this? The fall of the Berlin Wall. That really felt like the ultimate win for this American-led world. And get this, while he's speaking, a young American student in the audience is so moved he actually starts to cry. He stands up and thanks Little for reminding him of this positive role America played, especially at a time when the country felt so under attack. And that moment, right there, it just perfectly sums up the view from inside the system, right? This deeply held belief in a kind, rules-based world order led by America that was basically a force for good.
But that wasn't the only perspective in the room. Not by a long shot, because then another student gets up. This was a young man from Pakistan, and his experience of American power, it was a completely different story.
And this is really the core of it all, these two totally different realities. He basically said, look, if you lived inside the empire, so to speak, you saw a benevolent America, a power that protected you, that upheld the rule of law. But if you lived on the edge of that empire, like he did, you saw something else entirely. You saw an arbitrary power, a power that could pretty much do whatever it wanted, whenever it wanted, with zero accountability. Now, here's the kicker. You might think, okay, that's just one student's opinion. But it wasn't just some fringe idea. Fast forward a few years, and you have major players, guys like Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, saying the exact same thing on the world stage at Davos. He basically admitted that this rules-based international order was never the whole truth. The strongest countries could always make exceptions for themselves. And, history really backs this up. For so many countries, especially in the global south, the post-war era wasn't about rules at all. It was filled with examples where the rules were just tossed aside. You've got the CIA-backed coups in Iran and Guatemala back in the 50s, then the invasions of Grenada and Panama in the 80s. For a huge part of the world, these weren't weird exceptions to the rule. This was the rule.
So what was the official justification for all this? Well, a lot of it traces back to something called the Monroe Doctrine. Now, it started out as a pretty noble idea, right? Back in 1823, it was about protecting new Latin American nations from European powers. But over time, it kind of morphed into something else entirely. It became this justification for the U.S. to act like an international police power, basically giving itself the right to intervene in its own backyard, anytime it felt its interests were at stake.
Okay, so let's fast forward to our time, because this old tension is back in a big way. With the rise of the whole America First idea, that clear line between being inside the empire and being on the edge, well, it started to get real blurry for everyone. And you can really see the massive shift here. The old way, the post-war order, that was all about building alliances, working through international groups. America First just threw that playbook out the window. It became all about bilateral deals and pure national interest. The tools changed too. Instead of diplomacy, it was tariffs, sanctions, and military pressure to force other countries, even close allies, to do what the U.S. wanted. And this, right here, is the crucial change. For the first time, America's closest allies, we're talking Canada, countries across Europe, they started to feel that same arbitrary power that the student from Pakistan was talking about all those years ago. Suddenly, the experience of being on the edge of the empire had shown up right in the heart of the Western world. But here's the thing that's kind of wild. This aggressive, in-your-face pressure, it actually worked. For years, U.S. presidents had been begging their European allies to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense. But this new confrontational style, it didn't just get them to 2%. It pushed them toward a target of 5%. That's a number that would have been laughed out of the room just a year earlier. It was a stark reminder that, as uncomfortable as it is, raw power politics can get results.
So, this new, totally unpredictable world created a massive headache for what we call the middle powers. Think countries like Canada or a lot of nations in Europe. They're influential, they're important, but they're not strong enough to go toe-to-toe with a superpower all by themselves.
And this brings us back to Mark Carney, who put it about as bluntly as you can at the World Economic Forum. He said, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I mean, wow. The message was crystal clear. Sitting on the sidelines was no longer an option. In this new game of great power politics, you either help shape what's happening or you're going to get shaped by it.
So what was the breaking point? The thing that made everyone say, okay, things are really different now. Believe it or not, it was when the American president publicly floated the idea of buying Greenland from Denmark. I mean, just think about that. For Denmark, a key NATO ally, to have its own territory talked about like a piece of property for sale, it was a massive shock to the system. It sent a clear signal that the old rules of being an ally, they were gone. This was that moment of rupture. It's when these middle powers finally realized, okay, we have to stick together or we're in big trouble.
And all of this leads to what might be the most important takeaway. It makes you ask, what did the generation that actually lived through World War II understand that maybe we've forgotten?
At the 60th anniversary of D-Day, people noticed something really interesting about the veterans who were there. These old soldiers, they weren't talking about the glory of battle or their heroic acts. They were there to remember the friends they lost. And more than that, they were thinking about the world they tried to build after the fighting stopped. A world designed to make sure nothing like that ever happened again. See, they understood something fundamental. A world that runs on rules, on laws, on accountability, that is not the default setting for humanity. It's actually a rare historical exception. They knew exactly what the alternative was, a world where, the strong do whatever they want and the weak just have to deal with it. They knew that because they had lived through it. And this isn't just about how countries deal with each other. Think about the loss of trust we see inside our own democracies today. It's all connected. When that basic promise of the post-war world, shared prosperity, safety, a better future, starts to feel like it's breaking down, people lose faith in the whole system. And from that point of view, you could argue that populist leaders aren't really the cause of all this disruption. They're more like a symptom of a system that was already cracking under the pressure.
So that leaves us with a pretty fundamental challenge, doesn't it? The generation that came through World War II, they knew a really tough truth. Peace, democracy, the rule of law, none of that is guaranteed. It's not something you just inherit. It's fragile. It has to be fought for and built and defended constantly. And as our world seems to be slipping back to that historical norm of just raw power politics, the really urgent question for all of us is, how are we going to defend the peace that we were so lucky to be born into?